So this is one of those rare videos we do where unfortunately the post-fight reaction is probably going to be at least 5 or 10 times longer than the actual fight itself. I am of course talking about Daniel Dubois versus Marcus Kelly. Now I didn't watch the fights live, as I said on my previous video, Liam Smith v Liam Williams, which is now up on the channel. I was actually away this weekend, so I didn't watch the fight live, but I did see an article before watching this fight, which was written by, I think it might have been by Jeff Powell of the Daily Mail, who described the fight as a bad joke and farcical. So I wasn't overly infused to tune into it, but seeing as it was only 35 seconds of action, I thought I'd be mad to miss it. And it was the debut of 19-year-old heavyweight prospect Daniel Dubois. And the opponent he was in against, Marcus Kelly, who was 1-0, did not look a picture. He did not look a picture of athletic capability. You could see from the weigh-in that these were two guys who were of extremely different dimensions and two guys who lived extremely different lifestyles. So we put it that way, to be very, very kind. Perhaps not tactically the best fight to start a new BT Sports deal with Daniel Dubois versus Marcus Kelly, because it was what you could kind of refer to as the equivalent of a bug being squashed. Dubois came out, he looked at least half a foot taller than Marcus Kelly, potentially more than that. Dubois looked like a sort of bodybuilder in terms of his physique, whereas Marcus Kelly looked like someone who worked at Greg's the Baker's. And Marcus Kelly instantly started the fight by throwing some of the wildest, loopiest haymakers you've seen in your life. To be honest, you'll probably see punches of more technical construction thrown at your local Weatherspoons on a Friday night. Dubois, though, 19 years old, big stage, big night for him. He was calm, he was composed. He backed off Marcus Kelly nicely. Kelly charged at him really head down, bull in a china shop, and Dubois kind of took a step back. He stepped back 3 or 4 times, and then he threw a counter punch, caught Kelly, I think it was with a left hand, which sent Kelly going back to the ropes. Dubois closed in, swarmed on him. Kelly took a knee and kind of felt the power of Dubois and had enough and wanted out of there. And you can't really blame him, because this was obviously a complete mismatch. Possibly not the best fight to start a new deal with, based on how uncompetitive it was. Possibly not the best fight for a debut for Daniel Dubois, especially given the fact that we initially anticipated the opponent would be David Howe, which was obviously a very, very good debut opponent, and it went from what would be considered a very, very good debut opponent to probably a bit of a joke of an opponent. And realistically, if they'd got a guy in who was 0-3, but maybe didn't look quite that bad physically, it could have been more sellable. But I'm afraid the opponent was such a mess physically, and I know muscles don't win wars, but the opponent was such a mess physically, it was kind of hard to buy into it as anything more than a bit of a farcical fight. But nevertheless, Dubois could only beat what was put in front of him. It was a late notice opponent, and Dubois handled it calmly and very, very easily, which is what you'd expect. So credit goes to him for that. Look, off the 30 seconds I saw of him, there was very, very, very little to take. He looks like he's got a calm head on young shoulders, both inside and outside the ring. He's not a very slick individual in front of the camera, but in many ways that's potentially no bad thing, especially if you contrast him to a chap like Anthony Joshua, who always seems very media trained, a guy like Anthony Joshua who always seems, perhaps people tire of the sort of stay humble, always nice guy, gentle giant routine. Dubois, for me, not the most naturally, instantaneously charismatic, but I think there's an element of charm there, that he is, he's clearly just himself, and he's a young guy, he's on the big stage, and this is uncharted territory for him. So, I'll give him credit for that. Hopefully he's kept very, very busy. You know, the guy's 19 years of age, and if you look at the physique he's got already at 19, don't be surprised if he's got a bit of growing left to do in him, because you know when you're that big a man at such a young age, you know it can take you till your early 20s before you've fully grown into yourself, which is a frightening prospect given how big and bulky he is. And for me, I'm not an expert on sports nutrition, I'm not an expert on bodybuilding or anything like that, but to my eye, Dubois looks like one of those physical specimens where he's just naturally a very, very built guy. I'm sure he goes to the gym, I'm sure he trains very hard, I'm sure he lifts some weights, but for me, if you look at a guy like Anthony Joshua, he's got the sort of, you know, he's got veins popping out, he's got those deep ripped abdominals, he's got that low body fat percentage. You know, he's more of what I would consider, in my naivety, a gym constructed body, whereas Daniel Dubois is kind of more of a, yeah, I don't know. Daniel Dubois might train like a bodybuilder for all I know, but potentially he's kind of got the sort of physique that is just a naturally very, very powerful, heavy set physique. And yeah, I guess when you've got a physique that's that heavy set, there's always a concern that you're going to be a bit rigid and a bit robotic. Sometimes when you look at massively well-muscled fighters, they can be a bit stiff. You know, they can be a bit plodding, and that's certainly something to avoid. You know, you don't want to pack on too much unnecessary muscle. I think there's certainly such a thing as too much muscle in heavyweight boxing, especially when you need to start going 12 rounds. But you know, Dubois looked very good in the 30 seconds we've seen of him. Now, my personal perspective would be keep the guy operating at a very, very low level for some time. 19 years old. You could say 29 is a baby in the heavyweight division. But 19 years old is certainly a baby, and there's no need to rush him. David Howe, I'm sure he'd have beaten David Howe, but David Howe was an ambitious first fight. You know, lots of people already, I've seen people on Facebook talking about Daniel Dubois versus Joshua, Daniel Dubois versus Dillian White. You know, I'd forget about that. At the minute, I've seen nothing in, you know, you can't, from that 30-second clip, even throw him in against the likes of, you know, Nick Webb and Tom Little. You know, I'm sure, yeah, if you look at his amateur pedigree and that sort of thing, you can get the perspective that this is a guy with a far higher upside. You know, this is a guy who potentially could go on to great things in the sport. But all I'm saying is, based on that 30 seconds, you know, he beat a guy who any of the top 10 heavyweights in Britain would have had out of there in 30 seconds as well. So I just think that people shouldn't get ahead of themselves. People should remember that this is a 19-year-old boy. This is a guy who's probably still got some growing to do. And, you know, I don't want to see him pushed too quickly. I want Frank Warren to keep him prominent on bills. I think he's a guy who's potentially immensely marketable, and I want to see him constantly fighting just before the main event or something like that. I don't want him to disappear off the top of bills and be fighting low down. But I just mean in terms of level of opposition. Get him in against a few journeymen, get him in against some, you know, established guys who are going to give him rounds, and, you know, really start to build him and give him some experience of very, very different styles. But I don't think there's any need to rush him. And, you know, I did think David Howe was a bit of a, and as I say, beating David Howe, I'm sure, but I did think David Howe was an ambitious opponent. And, you know, for me, there's just nothing wrong for a 19-year-old heavyweight in his second fight to be fighting a guy with, I don't know, a 2-win, 10-loss record. I just think he's very, very young and shouldn't necessarily get ahead of themselves. But, of course, the long-term aim is we do want to see him in good fights. We just want to make sure that he gets some experience. And, you know, this is a guy who's been lured, I assume, by the financial provisions of the pros. But there's a lot of learning to do in this game. So that's my perspective on him. Yeah, very exciting prospect. We'll be keen to follow his journey, and hopefully he'll be one of those prospects where we can cover every one of his fights from here on in. Let me know your thoughts on Dubois, guys. How impressed were you? What did you make of the level of opponent? Was it a good way to start the new BT Sports deal? And who do you want to see him fight next? Do you agree with me that he shouldn't be rushed, or perhaps you think differently. Perhaps you're ready to see him in title fights in the next year or so. Let me know your thoughts, guys. Comments in the section below. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the thumbs up button. Do take the time to subscribe. Thanks very much for tuning in.